E85 is a wonderful fuel, and if I could drink the stuff, I would. Never mind the fact that it's overall better for the environment and that it's cheaper, it's also practically race fuel. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already know all about the benefits of this stuff. What you're here to find out is if you can just pull up to the pump in your rusted out 350Z, fill her up with corn juice, and instantly gain 50 horsepower. The answer to that is no, you can't. But in your head, for whatever reason, you're still thinking about doing it, aren't you? What if I did it anyway? The ECU will learn, won't it? It can't really hurt it, can it? So you know what? Let's do it. Let's fill a regular old car up with E85 and see what happens. But this is me formally declaring my I told you so. So the car we're going to be sacrificing today is this, my 99 Subaru Legacy. I previously swapped a newer H6 Boxer engine into it, but that's about all that's done to it. I haven't upgraded anything with the fuel system. Stock injectors, stock lines, stock everything. By all accounts, this is just a normal car. A normal car that desperately needs a full tank of fuel. So let's fill her up with the 85 and see what happens. Just about an empty tank. Fill her up with some E85. I'm also going to overlay a graph on this Johnson. This is going to be a graph of our O2 sensor, which is measured in lambda. Now, you're probably used to seeing your AFR measured in a ratio like 14.7 to 1, but for this experiment, it makes more sense to measure in lambda, and we'll see why later. For comparison, 0.9 lambda is rich. It's around 13.2 AFR. 1.1 lambda is lean. It's about 16.2 AFR. 1.0 is perfect, equal to 14.7, and it's exactly what we're shooting for. All right, let's fire this thing up. And immediately, it straight up doesn't want to run. Shocker. The O2 sensor is all over the place because it's misfiring, but it's reading ultra lean. That tells us that, for whatever reason, this thing isn't getting enough fuel. Oh, but we didn't change anything with the fuel system. All we did was just change fuels. And herein lies the biggest problem with the E85. It needs more fuel to have a stoic burn. Now, what does stoic mean? Let's examine that 14.1 magic air-fuel ratio number we talked about. What this number means is, if we have 1 gram of gasoline, we'll need 14.7 grams of air in order to get a clean burn. And by clean burn, I mean a burn where all the gas is consumed and all the air is consumed, and all that's left is exhaust. To oversimplify, your engine needs a clean burn. It needs to be running at that 14.7 AFR or it will hurt your engine. Now, I've got a whole video about this, by the way, so you might want to go take a look at it after this one. But that 14.7 number, that's for gasoline. What about E85? Turns out, its stoic ratio is 9.8. That's a 33% difference when compared to gasoline. In other words, you need an additional 33% of liquid E85 squirted into your cylinders. Why is that? Fucking chemistry, I don't know. Blame the public schooling system. They're the ones who should have taught you this shit. And here you are, learning it from me. Man, you've really hit rock bottom. Anyway, are you starting to see the problem here? Your ECU, that's the computer that controls your engine, he doesn't know to inject more fuel. He doesn't know that he's running E85 now, so how's he supposed to know to inject that additional 33% of fuel? Like, no wonder the sensor's reading so lean. That's why we're seeing lambda readings near 1.33, as in 33% lean. This poor ECU is just sitting here, crying for help. Well, if the ECU knows he's running lean, can't he just learn and start adding more fuel to fix it? Yes, he can. Let's have a look at how that process actually works. I'll fire the car up and let him start learning. Actually, here, I'll show you the percentage of learning he's done. There he goes. 1%, 2, 5, 7, 10, 15, 15, 15. Why isn't he adding more? He needs to add more. Add more! He can't! Your ECU has a hard limit on how much he can learn. Why? Imagine if your O2 sensor was bad and always giving false readings. Like, it was always telling the ECU the engine was running lean, but in reality, it wasn't. Your ECU would just think it's always running lean. Your ECU would just be there like, oh, we're running lean. I'll add some more fuel. Huh, still lean. I should add some more. And some more. Wow, still lean, gonna keep adding more. Until he's literally drowning the engine in fuel, which would cause serious damage. So he's programmed with a limit. Each ECU is different, and this one's set to 15%. Also, let's take a look into his memory, into his brain, and see what exactly he's learned. Here's his learning table. You can see that we're idling at 750 RPM-ish, and we're at negative 10 PSI of vacuum. In this little cell, he's learned that 15%, which is still too lean, by the way. But can you guess what would happen if I tried to rev the engine a little bit and hold it at like 2000 RPM? That's right, we go to one of the cells that he hasn't learned yet, Lean City. Now, is it possible for him to learn all of these cells? Yeah, but it's gonna take a long time. You think your engine will survive for that long? Are you really willing to roll those dice? As a little reminder, running lean is categorically the thing that will send your poor engine to the shadow realm. Okay, let's take a step back. We've identified that the main problem is the ECU doesn't know to inject that additional 30% fuel. So how can we fix this? There's a number of ways you can do this, but the most common way is to simply tune your ECU. Some factory ECUs can be programmed to run on E85 instead of regular gasoline. In cases where the factory ECU can't be reprogrammed, there's also the option of replacing it entirely with a standalone ECU, most of which can be configured to run on E85. And this is where I have to tell you something important. I lied to you. I told you that this was just a boring old daily driver, and that's not true. This car actually has one of those standalone ECUs. So this whole time I could have just set it to run E85, just like this. I'm sorry I lied to you. I didn't mean to hurt you. It won't happen again. Okay, so now the car is programmed to run on E85, so we're all good, right? Yes, and also no. As long as you're only running on E85, you're golden. Terms and conditions may apply. But what if you're in the middle of nowhere, you only got a quarter tank of corn left, and you gotta fill her up because the next station is a country mile away, and all they have is icky 93. Ew. Ugh. Oh, no. You're facing a dilemma. If you fill up with 93, your tank's gonna be 75% 93 and 25% E85. And that's only if your gas gauge is accurate. Who knows what it actually is? I'll tell you who knows. My ethanol content sensor. Oops. That might have been something I kind of forgot to mention earlier. Not only does this car have a standalone ECU, it's also set up with an ethanol content sensor, aka a flex fuel sensor. That was another lie. Last one though. I promise. This sensor tells the ECU the actual percentage of ethanol in the fuel, which could very well be 85%, cause, you know, E85, or it could be even lower, at like 30%. The ECU sees this number and adjusts how much fuel he needs to inject accordingly. This is actually the primary difference between a car that just runs E85 and one that is flex fuel compatible. Flex fuel vehicles can mix E85 and regular gas however they want. But that means your ECU needs to be capable of reading that sensor and adjusting based on what it's reading, which my standalone is. So if we take a look at what my sensor's reading, you can see we're at around 60% ethanol content in my fuel. And that's because I might have lied to you about some other stuff too. My tank wasn't actually at E when I stopped to fill it up. It was at like a quarter or something. This footage of the needle being on E wasn't even of the dash cluster in the car. It's just one I have sitting here on my desk. It's all lies all the way down. There's a camera, there's a camera, there's a camera. Santa Claus, not real. The Easter Bunny, a fabrication. The Tooth Fairy? Actually, totally real. And she will fuck you up to get those teeth. Also, you're adopted. So the ECU knows the actual ethanol contents of our fuel, so he knows how much fuel to inject now. We're all good, right? Well, hell yeah, brother, let's take this baby for a rip. Oh, shit, why'd the check engine light come on? What the shit was that? Injector duty cycle limit exceeded? What in the Sam hell does that mean? So, remember how I said I left the fuel system stock and that I didn't upgrade the injectors? That part? Totally factual. Haven't touched them. They're still stock. Here's the thing about stock injectors. They're not meant to flow 33% additional fuel. Who'd have thunk it? Injector duty cycle is how long the injector is open per revolution. So if your IDC is 50%, it's open 50% of the time before that cylinder inhales air. If it's at 100%, that's it. It's open as long as it can be before it's got to get ready for the next revolution of the engine. So here's a graph of the engine running on 93 octane. You can see the graph of our IDC creeping up as our RPMs rise up, which makes sense because as the RPMs go up, the amount of time we have to inject goes down, because the engine is revving so fast. Right at redline, we're at like 99%, which is awfully convenient, isn't it? Now here's the same graph, but with us running on E85, which again, makes sense. Remember, we gotta flow additional fuel for E85, so our injectors just aren't big enough. When manufacturers are speccing out injectors for their engines, they make them as small as possible. Smaller injectors are better for emissions, as it turns out, so it makes sense that they'd be right at 99% at redline when running on regular 93. That's what they're designed for. So what does this mean? Well, I've got to get some bigger injectors. And until I do that, I can't run this thing out past 5,000 RPM, which is unfortunate because, as we discovered in the previous video, that's where this thing makes the most power. That's when VTEC comes on and really helps this thing breathe. Check out that video if you have a chance. It's super cool, I promise. So I'm basically stuck with that E85 until I get bigger injectors. Alright, that about wraps it up, I think. What you should have hopefully learned from this video is you can't just go fill her up with corn juice. You gotta do some things first. You're gonna need to tune your ECU, upgrade your injectors, and you should ideally upgrade your fuel pump, pressure regulator, and maybe some rubber lines. I personally run E85 where I need to, but not in everything, such as my LS swapped RX-8. That runs on 87. The engine only has a compression ratio of 9.5 to 1, and it's naturally aspirated. For now. So it simply doesn't need it. And it's already at 90% injector duty cycles, so I couldn't run E85 even if I wanted to. If you learned something or laughed at any point during this video, you legally owe me a like and subscribe. Sorry, them's the rules. I don't make them. Check out my website for more info on my builds and follow my socials, blah, blah, blah. Now I've got to go drive this thing around so I can put some more 93 back into it. Thank you all for watching. And one more thing. I told you so. Bye for now.